So in this video, we're going to be creating a dovetail halving joint, a stronger alternative to your traditional halving joint that we looked at last time out, and a little bit more decorative too. So without further ado, let's get into it.
So just as we had done in our previous video, we're going to start by marking out our face side and our face edge, and we're going to follow through the exact same steps we did for creating the halving joint to get things started here. We've already covered this, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly. If you haven't seen the video previously, I'm going to put a link up in the top corner so you can go and have a look at that halving video before you come back to this one. But anyway, let's get started. So we want to create a simple halving joint. First thing we're going to do is measure the width of the wood back the way along the wood. In this case, I know that this is 35mm, so I'm going to make my mark there. Get our tri-square in, making sure that we reference off of our face edge. Carry it around. So this is the first thing we're going to do slightly differently here. We are going to remove the wood from the back side of this joint because we want our dovetail to be on the front face. So we'll mark that just to show that we're definitely taking off this side of the wood, and we'll get down to marking halfway. So as we had done previously, we'll go and do our little midway trick. So we'll take our marking gauge, make a mark from one side, go to the other side of the wood, check and see if that mark is exactly lined up with your previous mark. In my case this is, and if you found the same dot, then you have the middle. Okay, if you're slightly out, then you just adjust until the two meet in exactly the same point. So let's quickly square this off, or let's quickly mark this off, I should say. Don't worry about making a huge groove in the wood to start with. All you want is a little scratch that you can go over a few times and make it deeper as you go. So while we're in the process of marking out, we may as well define our sizes for our dovetail at the same time. So we're going to flip back over onto our face side, and we're going to measure 6mm in from either edge along this line here. Okay, as we're going to draw a diagonal line from that point to our size that we've marked in there. Okay, and this is going to give us our dovetail shape. So from here, let's go 6mm in. We'll do the same on the other side. Again, 6mm in. And we can just use our steel rule to join the dots to get that slope. And that is going to be the shape of our eventual joint. So next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to start actually cutting our joint. So we're going to follow the easy method that I showed you in the last video of setting up a fence to guide your saw. So take a scrap bit of wood that you know has a square side on it, clamp it to the top side of the piece of wood that you're working on, lining up very, very carefully with your mark that you've made with your pencil. Okay, so you only want the slightest bit of pencil showing on the side of there. We can now take our saw, and this piece of wood will guide our saw into exactly the place we want to cut. Quick check on the other side to make sure that we've gone down to the right depth. And that's it done. So once again, we're going to follow the exact same process as we did before. We're going to cut down at an angle from the corner here, making sure that we can see both faces as we're cutting. Bring our saw back along the line in both directions. And just start working your way back and forward between the two lines. Until you're certain that your saw is going exactly where you want it to. and we are happy with that. So we continue our cut down at 45 degrees here until our saw reaches a corner and our shoulder line here. Take our wood out, switch it around, and we've got this one last line here that we've got to follow. So same trick again, we'll go just to the waist side of the line. We're not cutting bang on the line, we're cutting just beside it. Let's just make sure that we track the line on this side as well, which we are doing. If we're a little bit further away from the line, that's fine, we can always bring it back with a chisel later. Okay, but if we've cut directly into the line itself, then our joint is going to end up too small. So I'm quite happy with that just now. So let's put this upright in the vise, do the final cut directly down the way, just to remove that last little bit of remaining wood. And there we go. Nice and tidy. So we are going to have to take this down just a little bit, because we've got our lines on the side here defining where our joint is going to go. We'll do this at this stage. So what we're going to do is, just as we had done before, let's place our chisel into our groove that we made previously with our marking gauge and just establish our lowest point. So we're not going to go any lower than that on that side there. I'm just going to work my way across the way here. Keep an eye on our line from the end there, make sure we don't go below that. You can work in from the end if you want to. In some cases it's a better option, but in this one I'm just going to work side to side. I'm not going to go all the way through to the other side. Okay, if I run the chisel all the way through, I run the risk of splitting the wood on the far side here. So if we're happy that that's following the line along the top there, we can switch this around. We'll come back the other way if there is any extra wood still needing attended to. Let's go find our line that we did with our marking gauge. We're pretty much bang on it, to be honest. There's very little wood to come off of this side. I'll do exactly the same as we did from the other side. Just reduce the height of the wood in the middle. We're not taking the edges any further down than what we have. I'm fairly happy that that should be pretty much flat now. So that's the start of our dovetail all done. So what we now need to do is actually turn our attention to our lines that we marked out last time out. So we can stick this in our vise for this one, because we're going to cut down our shoulders first of all, and then we're going to come in from the sides and follow these diagonal lines. We're not going to do it right to the line, because we'll finish it off with a chisel to make sure it's nice and smooth and follows the line exactly. So into the vise we go. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to cut our shoulders here down our line that we marked out earlier on for our dovetail. We can use this edge that we've got here as a bit of a guide to get our saw started and make sure that we're cutting exactly where we want to be cutting. But once we have that groove established, we just want to bring the saw down to level and just work our way down to the mark that we made earlier, making sure not to go too far. There's one side done. Let's switch over, let's do the other. Again, use the back edge of the wood there just to guide the saw, just to get things started. And I'm going to stop there for just now, and we're going to come in on our diagonals now. Now it is definitely tricky getting these started, because you are coming in at quite a steep angle. You can nibble away with the saw just a little bit until we've got a bit of a groove established. Okay, I'm using my thumb as a fence almost, just to stop the saw jumping out of the cut. That seems to be tracking quite nicely now, so we can, yeah, we'll follow that down. Okay, so that's cut very, very close to the line, but not actually on it quite yet. So we'll do the same again on the other side. Just going to set this up this way around. Now this one's a wee bit trickier because I can't use my thumb unless I go left-handed. Oh well, not easily anyway, but we can still pay close attention to what the saw's doing. Kind of nibble away at the edge of the line. Right, that looks like it's kind of biting at the wood now, so let's just make sure that we're not going to go beyond the line. That seems to be cutting alright. And there's our last little bit done there. So last thing we need to do is just tidy this up with a chisel, make sure it follows the line exactly, and then we can turn our attention to our other piece of wood. So the important thing here is paying close attention to where the line is and making sure that your chisel is razor sharp when you come to do this. We can take that little notch out at the bottom just where the saw split the wood rather than cutting it. We're just going to make sure that this follows this line as best as we can. Because we're coming in from the end here with the chisel, we're not going to have any issues with digging into the grain because we're very much cutting with the grain. So we should get a nice smooth surface here. Fairly happy that that's nice and flat now. I'm going to switch over, come back in the other way, and make sure this side's perfect now. So just as before, I'm going to start by just getting rid of any of the major issues, so that little notch there. And we can just get rid of the bumpy bits. Making sure that we follow the line exactly. And that is our dovetail cut. There's a last little bit of tidy up that we can do here, and that is just to make sure that our shoulders are nice and tidy. Okay, we want to check that it's the same height on either side. So I can see that this side is exactly on the line, whereas this side is just a tiny little touch on the high side. So we're just going to take our chisel in from the edge, using the shoulder that we'd established with our saw cut earlier, and just make sure that those two are even. And this will help our joint close up. There you go, that's me fairly happy with that. So what we're going to do with the other side of our joint is, first of all, we need to find out where our joint needs to go. So I've measured my distance from the end of the wood here. I've decided this is where my dovetail is going to go. We're going to line up the shoulder of that joint with the line that we've squared across there. And we're going to clamp this in place. Because if we want to get a really super duper tight, well-fitting joint, the best way for us to achieve that is to trace around the work that we've already done. So we are going to need a marking knife for this, either that or an absolutely razor sharp pencil to make sure that you are 100% accurate when you do this. We're just going to follow the line along here, make a nice little groove into the face side, of our other bit of work. We'll go to the other side, we'll do the exact same trick. Let's make a nice little groove there. And now we have the exact dimensions of our dovetail transferred onto our other piece of work. All that's left for us to do is transfer lines down the side. Same goes for the back side here. Mark our halfway mark just as we had done on a halving joint, and then remove the wood. With our marking gauge still set up from previously, we can just go and copy the side on, making sure that we're referencing from our face side. As before, start with just a gentle scratch and then add a little bit more pressure as you go. And with that, we're ready to get cutting. This time what we're going to do is I'm just going to re-establish these lines that we made earlier with my chisel. So I'm going to get my chisel into that knife mark that we made earlier on. Just going to give it a little bit of pressure just to make sure this is nice and neat and tidy. As we're going to use the other means of cutting this time, we're going to knife and notch. I've made my knife line just a little bit deeper. We're just going to go back a couple of millimeters from the line. make a groove with my chisel. And this groove is going to guide my saw to exactly where it needs to be. So once again, from the other side, just a couple of millimeters back. Take out a little wedge. And this wedge is going to guide our saw to exactly where we want it to be. Stick my thumb there just as a backup, just in case the saw wants to try and jump out of the groove. Now you could cut this joint with a fence just as we did the other time. I figured it quickest just to show you this way. So that should be us down to our halfway marks on both sides. Maybe just a little bit more on that back edge. Now we just need to remove the wood. So we'll take our chisel. We'll take our mallet. And what we're going to do is remove the wood a little bit at a time. So we're going to take a little layer off, and I'm just allowing the chisel just to rise up out of the wood here. Okay, I'm not worried too much about it being absolutely perfect. Okay, as we get closer to the line, we want to make sure that we are taking a little bit more care. We're still just letting the chisel just rise up out of the wood here. There we go. So our last one, we go into our knife mark that we made earlier with our marking gauge. And again, just going to let the chisel come up. And that's our lowest point. We're never going to go lower than that mark that we've just made there. We'll do exactly the same trick back in the other direction. So we're going to work back from the other side. Same trick as before. We're just going to take it off in little layers. So I can start by taking a slightly bigger chunk off the top. And as we get closer to the line, we want to be taking less and less off. Okay, so time for our last one now. Into the groove. Now, be careful with this, because you've got to remember that this is getting gradually narrower as you go in. So you don't want to dig into the sides of the wood that you want to keep and end up taking them out by accident. So that's the worst of this off. Now what we're going to do is take the mallet once again and start to remove some of the wood in the middle. I'm not going all the way through. I'm just removing the high bits from the centre section of this joint. That's the worst of it away. Now what we're going to do is just the same as we had done when we were levelling off our halving joint earlier. It's just working from our lowest point. We're not going any further down on this side. I'm starting just behind the line, just by hand, and just taking this back. As before, I'm not going to go past halfway here. Let's do exactly the same thing back the other way. So, flat side down this time. I'm going to go just behind that shoulder line and just work our way in from the edge. And there we go. So that's us met in the middle with the cut we made previous. We'll just kind of give that a little bit of cleaning out, make sure there's no high spots, which I don't think there is. And let's have a little test and see. So there's our dovetail. And would you look at that? Perfect, first try. So, we've got slightly high here, by maybe half a millimetre or so, so there's a little bit of tidy up to do just in the middle just to get this to sink down, sit properly. Here's the advantages this joint has over our simple halving joint that we did earlier on. This can only be removed in one direction. If I pull on it in a lengthways direction, it will not come out of that joint there. Obviously it can't go through the wood, and obviously we can't push it in the way to remove it. Okay, likewise we can't go side to side. The only way this can be removed is directly upwards. So this is very strong in a lot of different directions here. So a little bit of tidy up. You won't even need glue to hold this together. Obviously, once you've got things fitting absolutely perfectly and you want it to be a permanent joint, yeah, stick a bit of glue in there. But this is a nice, strong, quite aesthetically pleasing joint here. So that's us now finished off our joint there. We've got it nice and tidied up. There's no longer any sort of step on either side of this. It is nice and flush with either side. There's no gap on the back side here. All that will be left to do is pop a wee spot of glue in that and just do exactly the same as we did with our other halving joint, and either plane or belt sand this little bit of excess wood off here for a perfectly finished joint. So we'll pop a bit of glue in that, come back tomorrow and finish this one off. So I've left this as set now, and just as we had done before, we're just going to take off the worst of the remaining waste wood using a coping saw. And then because this is captive within the wood now, there's no risk of us splitting either end here, so as long as we go lengthways, we'll be able to take the rest off with a plane. There we go. That there is your completed dovetail.